Welcome to the Dibley diaries for this week. This week, in Thought for the Week, we're going to be thinking about hope and God's hope and all those things about it in the Romans passage in particular, and tie it in with the Gospel. But for the rural challenge, I've been thinking about what happens when in a small place you set up a new activity. Something happens and often people's hopes are not necessarily very realistically aligned with what might happen. Say, for example, you're starting a children or a children and families activity and you have 60 children in your primary school in your village. Some people will be hoping that all 60 will come along, and that really is very unlikely to happen. But maybe you might say, well, if 10 children came along, that is what success would look like to me. Or maybe if you said, actually, if 3 families come along who wouldn't otherwise have come along, then that's what success would look like for us. So we set these kind of realistic goals, thinking, actually, this is what we hope will happen, that we hope this will happen. We believe that we're hearing what God's calling us to do, and we hope this will happen. And with these kind of more realistic ideas of actually what does success look like? Success in this looks like that. It might look like 3 families, it might look like 10 children, it might look like 20 children, it might look like 20 people, it might look like 15 people from the village who don't normally come to church. I mean, all these sorts of different things. And we have these, and they're good for us to think, to then not be disappointed, but to be encouraged when our hopes have been fulfilled. And you never know. There are times when we do these things and God just surprises us. Thought for the week this week is based on the 2 Bible passages. From the Gospel passage we have Matthew 9:35 through to chapter 10 verse 8, and we have Romans chapter 5 verses 1 to 8. And they're interesting passages, and they're passages about hope. I've been really thinking about hope this week when I've been reflecting on these passages, and I have an earworm stuck in my head. It returns every now and then, this earworm. It's from One Republic's song Counting Stars, and it says, hope is our 4-letter word. Hope is our 4-letter word. So in the Gospel passage for this week, we have Jesus sending out his disciples. He's sending them out to the Jews who are living in the area at the time with a specific mission. And he tells them that they have to go, they have to tell people that the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. That the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. And then they're to cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons. These are all activities which are full of hope. They are full of hope. But I want to come back to the hope is our 4-letter word, a little earworm that I've been having, because people would have found this sort of hope shocking. It was difficult, it was unbelievable, and there were people who would be frightened of this sort of hope because it would be destabilising the political situation. When people were living in such heavy oppression, they might not want hope, or they might fear the hope that is being brought to them by these people. They might be frightened of it, that actually the Romans, even the Herodians, would come down on that sort of hope like a ton of bricks, and that people would be fearful about that sort of hope. But Jesus has sent his disciples out to bring that sort of hope. That is what Jesus has instructed them to do. And then we hear more about hope in the Romans passage, and I'm actually going to read this from my piece of paper because it's got one of those Paul sentences. So Paul is writing a letter to the Romans, and this is what Paul says. Suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. So Paul is saying that hope does not disappoint us. This radical hope, this hope of God's kingdom, it's the hope of freedom, it's the hope of all these things. And I think it's really poignant that Paul can write about this hope, even though we know that Paul had a physical ailment from which he was not cured. God did not heal him from the physical problem that Paul had going on in his body. He wasn't cured of it. But also Paul was not cured from his hope. For hope was this kind of radical thing. It was Paul's four-letter word. Hope was Paul's four-letter word. Now, for those of you who may be concerned that I appear to be taking most of my theological input and my serious studying from the lyrics of pop songs, this is not my only source, and I do feel like giving myself a gold star because I have finished listening to the audiobook of Tom Holland's Dominion. And I'm not only saying that because it was like a big job. I think it's more than 40 hours listen. It's a really good book, but it does take a while to get through it. But Tom, in particular passages, was talking about the difference between friars and monks. The difference between friars and monks. And I think that's really pertinent to us who are living in our communities today, in our parishes. So monks would make the vows of poverty, chastity and obedience, but they would also make a vow of stability. So they would stay in one place. They would be surrounded by other Christians. They would be worshipping and praying together. They might do stuff for people around them who would come into the monastery, but they had a vow of stability. Friars, and I have no idea how Friar Tuck fits into this, friars would go out. They would make the vows of poverty, chastity and obedience, but they would move from place to place. They would be taking hope with them. They would be taking Christ's hope with them from place to place when they moved about. And I think that is much more like we find ourselves in our parish situations. We are in a place, but we are not spending our time solely among Christians. We are not spending our time solely among people who believe in God, who worship alongside us. We are sent out. We are sent out like a friars would be. We are sent out like Paul was. We are sent out like the disciples were. And our job is to bring this radical hope, to bring our radical hope into the communities or the places where we find ourselves. Our job is to bring hope to the hopeless. The Dibley moment of the week. This week is something which happened to me really recently. I don't know if you're aware that there was some research which showed that more people were going to church, which kind of filled a lot of people with hope, and then it was worked out that they'd done their sums wrong, essentially. That's my understanding of what had happened. But a few weeks ago we had a church service in one of our church buildings which no longer has pews, and it has chairs instead. And at 1 minute before the service was about to begin, we had run out of chairs. There were so many people in the church building who come to a slightly special service, but not hugely. We just ran out of chairs, and I was just filled with hope because, you know, we've been doing some work in the village that it was happening in, and it was just fantastic. The church was absolutely chock-a-block, and we had run out of chairs. What a sign of hope in our community. And that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week, which is full of hope.